sparkly beans. If you're new here, hi, my name is Avery and I help justice-aligned, neurodivergent, and nerdy humans to cultivate ease and self-trust for growing into our emerging future. And when I talk about ease and self-trust and growing that and growing into a different future, a more just future, a more natural, aligned with nature kind of future, one of the things that I'm always thinking about is how to align with and identify our natural rhythms and our cycles. And this is actually a topic that I talk about a lot in a new course that I'm really excited to announce. So I want to just really quick tell you about that before we get into the different books that I've read that might be supportive to you if you're working with this. The course is called Unproductive. If you have been here a while, you might remember the Unproductive series on this channel, the playlist. You can also check that out fresh. I think most of what's there I would still agree with. But this course is really an amalgamation of all of my wisdom around healing from productivity culture, around unlearning capitalism and capitalist ideas around what you should do and how you should be, including operating on clock time, operating on calendar time, operating according to deadlines, how you can kind of destabilize that and work with time differently towards having more ease, having more self-trust, having more confidence and more clarity. So especially if you're somebody who's neurodivergent, I think you will really benefit from this course. It's also taught with tarot archetypes. So if you are here on this channel because you're a tarot person and you're like, tarot and life management and prioritization and planning, that sounds fascinating. Definitely check that out as well. Or if you're just somebody who, you know, struggles with getting things done and like, how can I be mindful and centered, human and creative and passionate, and also live in a capitalist world where you're generally expected to, you know, do stuff. I think that you'll find that the course is supportive for you. It's self-paced, it's an audio course, it's a lifetime download. You get a full transcript so you can read it like a book. You also will get access to a workbook, and it's very interactive, very applicable to your life. So I would really love it if you check out that link. It'll be right there below the video, and please let other folks know if you know anybody that you think might benefit from that. So that's where you can get all of my wisdom on this topic. But this video is about other people's wisdom and what are some of the books that I've read that address this. I think that we are very much in a time right now where there's a lot of collective waking up to the, you know, challenges in general of modern life, and then specifically to the ways in which a kind of regimented expectations around time, around deadlines, around how we spend our time, how we spend our energy. People are understanding and waking up to the fact that, oh, it's not just me that struggles with this. It's not just that I'm broken or I can't, you know, align myself and I just need to get with the program. I just need to be more productive or more efficient or more effective. No. It's a problem for everyone. And the way that our culture, our society, our workplaces, our lives are structured presume a lot of things that are myths, that aren't true, that are myths of a culture that prioritizes productivity. And it's been really exciting to see this. You know, I've noticed that in my reading, a lot of the books I've read are challenging different angles around modern culture and around some of this. You see it in going from sort of all the social justice books being, well, I should just say like the social justice books in general, I've noticed more and more starting to bring in healing, starting to bring in the importance of individual healing to collective justice, and the problems with kind of punishing ourselves for not getting things done, or for not showing up in certain ways, that sometimes we, you know, obviously well-meaning and wanting to like call each other and ourselves in and to improve, but that we can actually take on the language of toxic cultural language that is more punishing, that is more sort of trying to motivate ourselves by talking about the urgency. And don't get me wrong, social justice problems are absolutely urgent and they're huge. And also, like, things are on fire. That is a fact. And we often then respond to that by being reactive, by pulling out of our core truths, by feeling like, if something is urgent, then I'm not allowed to rest. If something is urgent, then I'm not allowed to pace myself. There's no time for me to do my own healing, my own learning. I need to just show up. And in my view, what happens when we act that way is that we burn out. We want to care for everyone else except ourselves. So we care for movements and we care for other people, and then we forget to care for ourselves, which leads to burnout. And we tend to often show up in ways that are more harmful unintentionally, because we're showing up from a place of not having prioritized our own learning, our healing, our processing of trauma. I'm not specifically mentioning this book for the reading roundup, but I will say, if you're familiar with Resmaa Menakem's work and his book, My Grandmother's Hands, and others who talk about collective trauma, but particularly Menakem uses this framework of clean pain versus dirty pain, and the idea that if we don't metabolize our trauma, if we don't process it, we're not allowing ourselves to be with our emotions, to experience them, to go through them, then we hold it as what he calls dirty pain, and that gets passed down generation to generation, and thus things don't get solved. And so I think that one really important part of this, and something that I've noticed in those social justice books, also noticed a lot from people who do write in a more sort of spiritual lens, and then noticed a lot of like this kind of, my course Unproductive is an example of this, right? And I'm so excited to see that, like, I've been talking about this for a long time, and saying like, oh my God, we, all these like productivity experts are always these like white guys with, very like typical sort of like family structures, and they're entrepreneurs, and they have an MBA, and it's very like, how do I like manage my life in the status quo? And so I wanted to create a course that was sort of like, how do I manage my life and also not be in that status quo? And it's exciting to see that a lot of other people are writing about this or talking about this. You may have heard, I haven't read, so it's not in here, but you may have heard of that book. I think it's Jenny Odell, like How to Do Nothing, or How to Do Nothing, I believe. I really want to read that book. Like even just the titles and books I haven't read yet, but like I have one that I'm, just about to read. I didn't quite get it in for this one, but a book called Anti-Time Management. I'm like, yes, like all these kinds of titles. And I'm sure some of them, are going to end up being more status quo than I wanted, but I think there's a real hunger for kind of, no, I don't want to be the most efficient and effective person that can be. I want to be present and enjoy my life. And that doesn't mean I don't want to do, like I don't want to, achieve some goals. You can meld together the two. So the books that I'm going to be talking about in this video, I'm going to do this a little differently because I do actually have quite a few. I have 7 books to mention. So I'm not going to spend as much time on each book, and I'm not going to kind of be like, here's this author's argument like I often do, and then synthesize them, because I think honestly my own argument in this area is pretty clear. It is very much that it's important for us to identify our own rhythms, our own cycles. There are many different ways to do that. And again, like, link below, check out Unproductive. We talk about all sorts of kinds of cycles. You can align with astrologically, how to like tuning into your body wisdom and the cycles of your body. We talk about, cultural and community cycles, the ways in which there's almost like a kind of like holiday supremacy of, obviously this is just, it's white supremacy, but it's a part of it. Or Judeo-Christian, honestly, or I should say Christian supremacy, because anti-Semitism is a thing. But this, like, Christian holidays and U.S. holidays, including some pretty horrific holidays, being prioritized as thing we should, quote unquote, should care about. And my own personal journey that really kind of inspired that part of the course and inspired a lot of my thinking on this has been that there are so many layers and layers to learn about my own what is meaningful to me in terms of how I mark time, as well as more sort of bodily and energetically, like where do I have, where does my body want me to go? Where does my spirit want me to go? When am I being asked? When am I asking myself, but maybe not from the brain place, maybe from a logic or intuition place, for rest, for play, or for work. Sometimes I do feel like energetic and ready to go. And so part of this is like it's a, chronic illness, chronic fatigue, chronic pain, these experiences, disability in general, neurodivergence, often we get forced to reckon with what our body needs. But it doesn't have to be a conflict, it doesn't have to be a negative experience. I think a lot of us have some space in between the obligations and the commitments and the things we have to do around time, and then where we can make some leeway, and where we can make some changes. And we do things kind of by default. So starting the week on a particular day, starting the month on a particular day. And so I've been experimenting a lot with, and I've talked about it on this channel, if I can find a particular video that I want you to watch, I'll stick it up there. I'm not sure if I can, but because I've talked about it all the time, kind of on and off. But it's been useful to me to kind of explore and have a mindset of exploration and curiosity around what the cycles could look like, and then to align practices with those. So to try things like, what if I use planetary hours to determine the kinds of activities I do at certain times, to kind of imprint my devotion to that area of life or that archetype or that aspect. I think of it as like a face of God, a face of the universe, that kind of like thematic, like topic or life area. Like, for example, doing, I've been experimenting with like sharing things in a Venus hour, which is a concept I could talk about in a video. If you're curious, leave a comment below. But particular hours of the day go with particular planets, and so like Venus rules the part of my birth chart that has to do with sharing, and particularly with community and with sharing around like ideals and hopes and visions and dreams. And so since so much of my sharing is about that, just try experimenting with that, like keying that and seeing how that feels. So that's an astrological example. I've been doing my tarot practice, and I can, if I remember, leave a video on this above. I talked about my weekly and monthly practice and the way that I've actually started, instead of doing like a calendar week, I've started doing a ritual where I do a spread for the month on the new moon, a spread for the week, usually later that day, and then every quarter phase, so new quarter, full quarter, new, is when I do a weekly spread, and then I do a daily spread. And so it feels like the week starts with the moon phase. And for me, being a very lunar person, that's actually really been helpful in like embodying that. So there's all kinds of ways you can do this day, week, month. And again, check out that course below if you want to know more. But now I'm gonna, or in a moment, I'm gonna have one little digression, but then I'm gonna tell you about some different books, depending on where you are here, that you might find useful. So I have a couple of books first, if you're at a place of sort of trying to identify what those cycles are for you, what your own rhythms are for you, that you might be interested in addition to the course that I made. And then I'm going to give you a few different books that more generally I think were inspiring, gave kind of ideas to me around that kind of clash between our natural way of being and modern culture. And so each of those books do address this time, cycles, rhythms piece, as well as broader. So if you're in a place where you kind of can't like see a path forward, or just are looking for some inspiration, or haven't even noticed the problem and are like, I've got a clock time calendar, what's wrong with those? Check out those books. And then I'll have a couple of memoirs if you're more of a, I do nonfiction reading roundups here, but if you're less of a like, I want to read somebody kind of point by point directly going through something, and you want to read about someone's life, a couple of memoirs that speak to this. But before I do the books, one quick little, this is a book, but it's a note. The other day I knew I was going to do this video, and I was like, I pulled this card. And I wanted to read you from the guidebook. So I pulled the power card from, what is this deck called? Wow, why am I blanking on the name of this deck that I use very often? I bet it says at the beginning of the book what the deck is called. Yeah, Threads of Fate. So this is the Threads of Fate Oracle deck I really, really like. And I pulled the card on power. And it's really about calling back your own power and claiming your own power. And I thought it was really cool that there was, so in this particular Oracle deck, there are, each card has some associated things. It has an associated animal, an associated, they're all the same. Yeah, it's always an animal, a plant, and a stone. And the animal for the power card is the bear. And I just wanted to read to you from this because I thought it was a really interesting connection between timing and cycles and our personal power. And I think a lot of these books are speaking to the power that we've given away to culture, to expectation, to this feeling of like we should be a certain way, or well, I guess we just have to do it because it's the way it is, or just giving away power to kind of not noticing or being with or considering alternatives, and pulling that back to ourselves and the natural power that we are born with that is inherent in just our existence on this planet. So the bear teaches us that understanding and working with our personal cycles amplifies our personal power. While it is widely accepted that bears hibernate, this is not actually the case. They go into a deep sleep called a torpor, which means that while their bodily functions slow, heart rate, digestion stops, they are still able to wake up if startled. They go into torpor to survive the winter when food is not readily available, and do so by eating more in the fall to store up body fat. As humans, we may not sleep for months, but we all have our personal cycles. It is important we know what to expect from ourselves. We may not feel productive during the new moon, very productive during the new moon, or even an entire season, and that is okay. There will be other times when you have way more energy and space within you. Knowing these things about yourself is powerful, as it helps you prepare and maximize your potential. So I actually got this in my reading for the month, as I mentioned, at the new moon. This was a new moon in Leo. It's 2022, you're seeing this later. And I pulled that card, and I really liked it. Again, that's from the Threads of Fate deck. That's the credit. I really liked it. I guess I should say, what's the name of the creator? Blair Porter and Britt June. I don't know specifically who wrote the guidebook, but those are the two creators. I thought that was really inspiring to think about a bear and this idea of, the bear knows that the resources are limited in the winter, so it is a response to the bear's environment. And it's also intuitive, right? The bear just kind of knows when to do it, I assume. Not knowing a whole lot about bears, but that's my understanding. And also interesting that the bear can respond when startled. So they're not fully asleep. And it made me think about how rest, sometimes we conflate sleep and rest. So like understanding the importance of rest outside of just sleeping times. And the importance of responsiveness, being able to be responsive. We may sometimes feel like, oh, there's no way I could change up my whole cycle. But could you do it mostly? Could you make a change and then sometimes have to adapt? So an example is that I take a rotating weekend. I've mentioned this before. I take a day. I don't do 2 in a row because I don't like the Sunday scaries, where like Saturday is the fun day and then Sunday you're just thinking about Monday. Never liked that. So since I'm working for myself now, I am like, I think I'm just gonna have one day, but have it more frequently. So it's the same amount of time, more or less, sometimes more than 2 days a week on average. But I take a day when I need a day, and I just rotate it. And I say, it's Saturday now, when I feel like it. That's also, it fits in well with my kind of like starting to not really worry about what the start of the week is in calendar time, what the calendar tells me, but like what moon phase are we in? And it may be that in certain moon phases, I take more of those days, like waning, like towards the end of the waning cycle is when my energy tends to be really low. So right before a new moon, I might take several days, even in a row, and just, that's fine. I'm fine with that. But what that does mean, I have a business where I do sometimes have calls. I do sometimes have commitments on particular days. And so it might be that something's a Saturday, but I still have a call, right? So that's sort of my version of maybe I'm not able to fully always have that be a full day off. I'm still responding to my environment and the needs of my clients and folks I work with. And when I can get access to services like my own coaches, but at the same time, I'm mostly just honoring what my body needs. There might be corollaries for you. But yeah, I love that the way that passage on the bear emphasizes the calling back of our power through thinking through those cycles. So the books that I would point you to, and these are all books that I've read at some point in the last probably 9 months or so. So they all they didn't all come out in the last 9 months. So most of them did. I have one that was earlier. So one is, if you're interested in the astrology angle of this, I would really recommend a book called, and sorry, I should say down below, I'll have my course link, and then below that I will include links to the full reviews for each of these books. So if you do want a review of the book in full, just check that out below. I have one for most of them. I haven't posted one of them yet, but most of them will be down there. And as always, if you want to know when there's a new review out, new book, new thing, quickest way is newsletter. Again, all links are below, but one of those is to my newsletter. Okay, so Body Astrology is a book by Claire Gallagher that I really like. It is medical astrology, which is a pretty esoteric. It's a subject that is a very technical and complex. It can be. The sources tend to be these traditional Greek sources in Greek, and I believe some medieval as well. But the original source material is very sort of dense, and while there are great medical astrologers out there and great folks teaching medical astrology, I found that even going to a current astrology conference and learning about medical astrology, it often kind of goes over my head. And so I was so happy to read Body Astrology because this is a book that uses the principles of medical astrology, but it's super accessible. And one thing I really like is that Claire Gallagher, in writing this book, starts from a place where you can kind of start now. And so if you're interested in astrological timing but don't know a lot about it, this book works. If you already do know a whole lot about it, this book works. So as an astrologer, sometimes I'll read a book and be like, yeah, I know that. But this actually, it was really well keyed to both. And it gets you right in because she talks about moon cycles first. And so even before you read everything she says about signs and planets and all of that, you can dive right in with just experimenting with the timing of, how your body feels in different moon phases. And it's very beginner friendly. So if you're curious about that, check that out. I'm actually going to be announcing, I'm not going to say anything about it yet because it's not ready, but that I am going to be doing a collaborative thing that's about the moon. And you should sign up to the newsletter if you want to be the first to know about it, because it's going to be really queer and it's going to be about the moon and it's going to be about the stuff we're talking about here. So if that sounds interesting to you, sign up for the newsletter because you'll be the first to know about it. And unfortunately, YouTube doesn't provide, I don't have enough followers to have a community tab, so I don't have a great way to let you know about things from YouTube without making a whole ass video. So sign up to the newsletter. Yeah, so I've actually been thinking a lot about this, about moon cycles and timing and phases. And I actually asked in my newsletter, as we were preparing for this workshop, this new thing, I was like, hey y'all, curious, I have some questions about the moon. And one thing that I noticed, both me and my collaborator did this, one thing that I noticed is that folks tend to get really intimidated by working with the moon because it feels like, oh, there's a phase and then it's gone, and there's a phase and then it's gone, right? And even if you're reading body astrology and you're looking through the phases, you might have that initial reaction of, oh, moon timing is very quick, and I can't be aware of what phase or sign or whatever the moon is in. And I had that too. I found that the moon revealed themselves to me and the timing kind of came into place the more I was embodying a lunar way of living. And that it took time. So like it took several years before it really sunk in. And even now, I would say I'm not always super, like I have a general awareness, especially because of this tarot practice, of like which at least out of 4, like which 2 are we between? Right now I can tell you that the new moon was a few days ago, and so we are in the initial part of the waxing cycle. Maybe one day I'll be able to tell you all 8, where we are. You can divide the moon phases differently. But I think one of the things the moon teaches us is allowing, a receiving, that we don't always have to be forcing it and pushing it and moving in that way. And that it's very personal. And one thing I really like about Gallagher and body astrology is, so the moon is just one of the things in the book. There's lots of contents here that could help you with your rhythms and your cycles. But starting from that point, I thought was really smart. And then throughout the book, there's a lot of emphasis on how, and it's very body positive, by the way. So it's not just about the body, but it's also like stories you have about your body and how you interact with your body, how you work with your body. But throughout the book, with that body positive, body, or even just body neutral kind of lens, there is an understanding that like everyone is individual, and there are so many parts of the chart. And so Gallagher does give you a lot of this information. But what I liked is, in contrast to other medical astrology where I've kind of been like, what do I do? I think there's an awareness in this book of that it's a practice, and that you're feeling out yourself, and that, you're using your own intuition and developing like your body sensing skills. And then you can look and see like, oh, how does that match up with the astrology? But for example, some people have way more energy in the waning moon. Some people have, I for example, do not sleep well on a full moon. Never do. Never have. I have a partner who does not sleep well on the new moon. We happen to have pretty much opposite moon phases that we were born under. So that's always my theory, is that it's because we were born under a different moon phase, but who knows, right? So there are all these intersecting and overlapping phases in astrology, but I think body astrology is a really good start to that. A totally different book, so the other one I'll recommend in terms of just identifying and getting to know your cycles, is Undrowned. I finally read Undrowned. So I'm pretty sure I pre-ordered Undrowned. I was so excited. It was one of these books that I was thrilled to read, so excited to read. Could not believe that someone had written a book. And that someone was Alexis Pauline Gumbs, who I already have like hard eyes, fan of. That someone had written an amazing poetic book about marine mammals and the lessons that you can learn from marine mammals, intersecting with Black feminism and intersecting with kind of decolonizing and anti-capitalism and all of that. And marine mammals. I was just like, like my little water baby activist heart exploded. And then I bought this book, and hilariously enough, for the topic of this, right, it was like, oh, I need to read this for this, and I need to review this, I need to do this, and somehow, the thing came out in 2019. I just finally read the book. And I've been reading it really slowly, and I finished it recently. I actually started on my birthday, which is a Pisces birthday, and it happened to be a Pisces new moon this year, so I was just like, oh, this is where we're going to start, and I've just been kind of reading through it. Undrowned, again, the author is Alexis Pauline Gumbs, and it may seem like a kind of strange recommendation to throw in a video about rhythms and cycles, but it's a book that is organized into these different meditations on marine mammals, and they really read like love letters. They're all, each of them have these beautiful sentences where it's just like, I love you because of this, I love you because of this, addressed to the marine mammal. And it's a combination of facts and research and like learning about these marine mammals, and then embodied experience and intuition, and how Gumbs' experience of life intersects with the way that marine mammals exist and live. And so I just realized that there are tons of examples in this book from these marine mammals of different rhythms and cycles that I think might be inspiring it was inspiring to me if you're thinking about your own rhythms and cycles, because they remind us of all the different ways in which, things are in some cases predetermined by our bodies, but in other cases up for change and adaptation. There's a lot in this book about adaptation as a change doula I really appreciate. And so, these creatures, they all breathe and eat and sleep and nurse and gestate and live in different rhythms and cycles. And while certainly, we can't, as humans, be like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna like dive to the bottom of the ocean with all of the oxygen that I need and already stored in my blood and slow my heartbeats, and trust that we'll make it back to the surface again. We can get inspiration, I think, around the kinds of things that we might adjust. And it's interesting to read about, inspiring to read about creatures that are mammals, so they have to breathe and they live in the water, and what that looks like, their kind of cycles of like what they do, how they adapt to live and sleep and eat and everything, and also breathe. How does that all go together? So yeah, I mean, I would recommend Undrowned just in general, but I think it could be really inspiring for thinking about what are the different things that we do that we kind of take for granted, whether it's 3 meals a day or waking up at a particular time. And what are the things that we do that are inspired by our environment or nature, and what might we want to change and adapt? Okay, so those are the 2 on identifying your cycles. Now, if you're more at a point where you just want to, get some inspiration, some ideas about this clash of modern culture with what's more natural, and to feel into what that might look like, what a different way of being might look like, 3 different books. First one is called Root and Ritual. It's by Becca Piastrelli. And rhythms and cycles are there's some stuff on them sprinkled throughout, but it's a 4-part book that goes into a bunch of different topics, land, ancestry, community, 4th one I can't remember, and coming back to a more natural way of being. And I think especially for folks who may be white, middle class, fairly acculturated to those ways of living, like mainstream ways of living, or any of those, would particularly find things in this book that might be new, that might be meaningful, that might be inspiring from the author's experience as a white woman. I'm pretty sure woman. I think I got that right. I have 98% that I have that right. I always like to check gender identity and pronouns for obvious reasons. I'm not binary, hi, in advance. But the author is talking a lot about her own experiences, and so particularly when it comes to like the ancestry section, there's an awareness and acknowledgement that's gonna feel differently depending on the systemic oppression that your ancestors experienced, and access to information about ancestors, as an example. And so therefore it might be more relevant to folks with European ancestry. But the book overall, I think, does a really good job of digging into alternate ways of being, and specific practices and exercises and ways that you can adopt those. Another one along sort of similar lines is called Radically Content, and that's by Jamie Varon. And Radically Content very much has a general vibe of kind of like slowing down, beating, like, beating is the wrong word, like avoiding or distancing or unassociating, disconnecting, there we go, from hustle culture, from striving towards a constant goal. You know, one thing that I talk a lot about in Unproductive is the way capitalism kind of encourages pursuing like a linear path towards a goal. And Jamie Varon is writing about how you can opt out and writing about the problem of everything being about pursuit and about emptiness and hunger, and what if it was about fullness and abundance and being radically content, as the title would suggest. And so there were parts of that book that were very much like, okay, this is a white middle-class woman and it's a specific experience. It's another book that, even more so than Root and Ritual, I think, like Wen's memoir through or personal experience through talking about some of the things to unlearn and then relearn, which is the frame of that book. It's unlearning, then relearning. And so some of those things aren't going to hit for everyone, but I do think the overall message was really strong, and it's really about kind of how finding contentment, not in a like, oh, you should be grateful for where you are kind of way, but in a kind of, we're not encouraged very much to focus on our joy and our contentment, and sometimes we miss when we get caught up in this hustle mindset. And so that's a book that might be useful if you find yourself there, to kind of consider an alternate path. And then the third book is called Soul Authority, and that's by Loraine Y. Van Tuyl. And this is Soul Authority is a framework, concept, method that Van Tuyl developed for working with clients. And it's one of these books where I always am like, please sell the meditation as an audio, because it's I actually wonder if this is out as an audio book. That might be a good way to pick it up, because it's got really long meditations. Like the method is involves like listening over and over again to guided meditations, and so they're printed, and the idea is you can record it in your own voice. I don't know about you, I don't want to listen to myself. I can't meditate to my own voice. But that said, this book is really gets to like the kind of like question of what is my soul purpose or my calling ultimately. But as it does, Van Tuyl's method kind of goes through different elements, goes through kind of meeting yourself and developing. It's a practice, the meditative practice, but getting to know parts of yourself and to disconnect from, again, detangle from a normative capitalist way of doing things. And the perspective, Van Tuyl is originally from Suriname. I really hope I got that right. I'm fairly certain I did. Suriname. And writes about growing up in the rainforest, growing up around different indigenous communities, different ways of life, having a personal embodied connection and relationship with the rainforest, with the trees, with particular beings in the rainforest, and then moving to the United States and being educated in the United States and having this kind of culture shock that, you know, a lot of people go through, I think, in that scenario, and going through the experience of being a woman of color in the United States and all that entails, and offers this method alongside some stories of her own experiences in a way that I think a lot of folks will find inspiring. And also it's a good kind of like a reminder around the importance of direct relationship and embodied relationship with nature, and how that is part of figuring out, who you are and how you're meant to move in the world. And so that's another book you might consider. Finally, the last two, so, I feel like every one I'm like, and this is also kind of memoir in the sense that it involves personal stories, but two just straight up memoirs, both of which I really liked. The first one is called Field Notes on Listening, and it is by Kit Dobson. And it uses the frame of listening and of sound to explore all sorts of topics, but really it's, a lot of it's about climate change, it's about social justice, it's about colonizing. It's from the perspective of a white Canadian person who lives in so-called Canada, in northern Alberta. And there's a lot of contrast between talking about Dobson's childhood growing up, particularly time spent with two sets of grandparents, both of whom lived in northern Alberta, and who worked on the land, and contrasting that with his kids' experience right now. And just some of the sort of like the grief and the loss and like seeing how things have changed over time. Like you can literally see fewer stars in the sky, some of these, observing the change in the landscape. And everything is through the perspective of sound. And so there's a lot about, what does a snowy landscape sound like? What does, what do we learn from the sounds of different creatures and different things? And I think it really engages with this question of rhythms and cycles throughout, because there is this relationship between, deep time and like time on an ecological scale, and place on an ecological scale, and then on a human scale. And looking at this lifetime, I mean, he's still alive, but like a good chunk of a lifetime, and the changes and the acceleration of the changes in that period of time, and white ways or colonizer ways of seeing time and land contrasted indigenous ways of seeing time and land, as well as just, I don't know, it's a really, it's called Field Notes on Listening. It has that kind of field notes quality where like certain sections are very short, right? But it's poetic in a way that really, I think, evokes this sense of listening and what does it mean to listen. And then you kind of have to slow down to read it, because it is very accessible language, but like it's just like each, in certain sections it's like, oh, each word has so much power. So that one would definitely be a recommendation. And then the last book I'll mention, that honestly probably is favorite book this year. I'll say favorite book this year so far. 1,000 Ways to Pay Attention by Rebecca Schiller. I'm like a little in love with this book. So the link down below to the review, it's actually, I mean, it is a book review, but it is some of my reviews are more so straightforward and some of more like essays. And this is more of the essay type. And so, I wrote a little kind of about my own experience with ADHD and wove it in with talking about the book, and was kind of experimental in the way I wrote this review. And so I'd love it if you want to check it out. But the book is an ADHD memoir, 1,000 Ways to Pay Attention. It's an ADHD memoir, and it really plays with time. It plays with expectation. It's the story of a woman in England who moved from London to what they call a small holding, so like a smaller farm, basically. That's kind of like, is this a garden? Is this a farm? Like, it's small enough to be, it's not commercial at all. But I think we'd call it a homestead here, I believe is what she said the equivalent was. But moved out there after a really hard year in the city, spoiler alert, she has ADHD, but throughout you kind of get that at the beginning, but throughout the book, it's the course of a year, and it's not talking about ADHD because it's the year before she was diagnosed. And she has this really like whimsical style and this sort of like relationship to the land. And so she's talking about like relationship to the land, magic and intuition, and like there are bits of the book where you're like, is this a dream sequence? Is this, I'm not sure. But in the way that she writes, I've never felt so much like reading a memoir like, oh my God, you're inside my brain. So if you have ADHD or you think you might, it's just really validating and like, oh, right, to be in this world of the year before she was diagnosed. The whole time in which she's thinking like, am I bipolar? Am I that, like, just what is my diagnosis? Having some really intense experiences. So warning for some pretty intense like mental health experiences. But very, very real. And then getting to the point of, it's kind of a year and then almost like a long postscript of the actual process of getting the diagnosis. But in that style, you both are experiencing a different relationship to time, and then in the way that Schiller kind of chooses what to describe and what not to, and jumps between, as the ADHD brain does, you get that sense of the way that our minds, folks with ADHD, and neuroemergent folks in general, I think, the way our minds operate on different scales. And I think I said this in the essay, like, the way we're constantly working in different contexts, different scales of time and different scales of space. And so she writes a lot about the land and what it means to be a white person living on a small holding, writes about the history of the land a lot. And so time like expands and contracts because she goes down research rabbit holes, looking into the history of the land. And then there's the immediacy of her immediate moment. And there's this very much like, it feels like a heartbeat almost of like expanding and contracting of time within this narrative. And it really inspired me to have more permission to myself and to kind of feel into the way that rhythms and cycles are not necessarily consistent and don't have to be. And that's okay. And I won't spoil it, but she makes a really interesting research discovery about ADHD folks and the role of ADHD folks in ancient history, the likely role, right? We don't know for sure, but like the likely role of ADHD folks based on some genetic research in ancient history. And it really, if you've ever thought of ADHD as like, oh, that's a thing that's been around for 20 years, like, or if you've ever had as I have, if you ever had somebody be like, oh, that's just a new thing that, the computers made ADHD, like they didn't. So if you're, ADHD and you want to kind of locate yourself in time and in a lineage, I found that book really healing. Okay, so that was lots of books that you can read. Of course, I would love it if you also checked out the course link below to Unproductive. I think a number of these books would pair really well with the course, and it would be meaningful to me if you considered buying it, but also considered sharing, because it is tough to get the word out there, especially about sort of like unique, weird, let's talk about tarot and astrology and challenging narratives of productivity, kinds of things. It's not an obvious niche, and so marketing is tough. So if you can help me get that word out, I would really appreciate it quite a lot. And yeah, I'd love it if you checked it out yourself. And if you have any questions, let me know. And if you want to check out any of these books, check out the links to the reviews below. And then last thing is, if you want to know when I'm doing new and exciting things and get access to things early and potential discounts and all that good stuff, newsletter is the best way to do that. Okay, I think that's everything. I hope you enjoyed the books. I hope you enjoyed this video, and have a great day.